Welcome back to the Real Life Theology Podcast. I'm your host, Reagan Gibbs. This season, Season 8 of the Real Life Theology Podcast, we're going to feature breakouts from the 2024 Renew Gathering. In today's episode, we're going to hear from Clayton Hensel, the lead pastor of the Crossing Church, and how he recently led his church through complex and controversial issues, particularly LGBTQ topics, by emphasizing the importance of clarity, thorough preparation, and courageous communication of biblical truth.
All right. First off, thanks for coming to this one. And the topic is leading a megachurch through LGBTQ issues. I'm going to kind of breeze through this stuff in less than 30 minutes. Then we're going to pause the recording, and I'll give you some real-life examples and give you an opportunity to ask questions, so that way our questions and my examples don't hurt people that I get an opportunity to pastor. Does that sound like a fair plan? So I am a pastor at The Crossing, which is a church that has multiple locations. I became the senior pastor a little over 2 years ago. I've been at this church for almost 20 years. And every single year, I pick a topic that is somewhat controversial, and I preach through it. And the reason for that is I don't want to worship growth at my church. I want to make sure that we are taking strong stands on a regular basis on whatever it is. We did a 12-week sermon series on mental health. We did a 5-week series on LGBTQ and abortion issues. This year we're going to do a 4-week sermon series on politics, followed by Father's Day, followed by 4 weeks on giving. So we'll see what kind of church I have at the end of that 9-week stretch. But in the fall of 2023, we did a 5-week sermon series called Messy. And it started with a messy introduction. Then we did Messy Grace. We did Messy Truth. We called it abortion because messy abortion didn't seem the right phrasing. And then we did a messy response. And someone once said that whatever you are not supposed to talk about in your church or in your community is exactly what a preacher should be talking about, because we need to make sure that the gospel truth is good in every sphere of our life. So let me give you 5 reasons. I made it easy for if you're a note taker. 5 reasons why you should preach on it. The first one is your church needs to hear it. They are getting crammed down their throats everywhere else an alternative worldview. You already know this. I didn't say anything new there. Your kids are getting it at school. The old people are getting it on the news. And the people you actually want in your church are getting it on social media. And so there is a constant, nonstop narrative. And what gets promoted is bad churches with bad theology who appear to be making reasonable arguments. And so there'll be a person who calls himself a pastor who have a church, and they will, the algorithm, or they're paying to promote a worldview that is, that has the appearance of biblical worldview, but has no biblical roots whatsoever. I'll get into that in just, I'll use it. There were 2 people that I saw come across my feed, and the arguments that they made were ridiculous. And then I was going, okay, I'm going to go on a deeper dive. And so I actually started watching some of the sermons that were coming out of these churches. And what I thought was that I was going to listen in on a pastor who basically didn't open the Bible at all, didn't preach through the Bible at all, and just made a bunch of arguments. That is not at all what happened. This guy opened up the Word of God and completely twisted it. So if you attend that guy's church, you're going, this guy preaches from the Bible just like you do. The problem is the things that he was inserting into the text are nowhere to be found. The ways he's handling the text are completely out of bounds. But if you are an uninformed person, which I would guess, I'll let you determine, what percentage of your church are biblically uninformed, they make a sound argument. So the first one is your church needs to hear it. The second thing is people should not be surprised by our positions or discover them later on. This is the exact opposite of what you heard a prominent communicator recently say, which is don't take their church from them. People should know where you stand, then instead of like you bait and switch them 3 years after they've been a part of your church. People should have a really clear view on what kind of community that they're joining very early on. I'll say this just as a little disclaimer. This is an area where you trust God and you just don't ever worship attendance. Because if we're worried about not saying things, because we're worried about what it might do to our attendance, we are actually automatically putting a lid in the kind of church we're going to be and the kind of people we're going to become. Because we're saying we're just not going to talk about these things because they're hard. Third reason why you should talk about it is you are going to get labeled, no matter what. At least let us articulate our position so they can label us accurately. If I'm going to take the heat, at least let people know where we stand and take the heat I'm willing to take. But if our people are uninformed, if our people don't know where we stand, we can get labeled by the crazy churches, that we can get labeled by the liberal churches, we can get labeled by all kinds of people. At least articulate our position so our haters can label us accurately and your people can defend you accurately. Fourth reason why you should do it is people are struggling and need answers, guidance, and hope. If we believe that God's word is good, it's good in all seasons, in all times, in all situations, on all topics. And this is an area where we get to practice faith. Last one is if we believe that God's way is the best way and we are not ashamed of the gospel, then we should proclaim it as loudly as possible. It is not surprising to me that Paul says in Romans 1 verse 16, I am not ashamed of the gospel because it is the power of God that brings salvation to everyone who believes, first for the Jew, then the Gentile. For in the gospel the righteousness of God is revealed, a righteousness that is by faith from first to last, just as it is written, the righteous will live by faith. And it is interesting to me that these verses show up right before he starts walking people through the sinful state. He begins by saying, I'm not ashamed of this gospel, and this gospel shows you that you are a sinner, but it shows you also how you can be made righteous. And if you are not a sinner, there is no good news because you don't see your need for a Savior. 2 Corinthians chapter 10 says, we demolish arguments and every pretension that sets itself up against the knowledge of God, and we take captive every thought to make it obedient to Christ. Our church has grown through all of the sermon series that I thought would kill our church. Because people are hungry for someone to speak about something that matters to them, that's in their living room, that they're trying to navigate. The hot topic issues of our day are indeed the battlegrounds where people are going, can I get some help and can I get some hope? So let me give you the 5 steps of preparation. How did we prepare for the series? All right? I made it all 5s. So how did we do it? First thing, I systematically got myself up to speed. This was the most prepared for sermon series I've ever done. I started this at least 9 months early. I listened to people inside of our movement. I listened to podcasts. I listened to counter arguments. I did historical research, and I did biblical research. You need to understand the cultural arguments. You need to understand the counter arguments. If I had not listened to this guy preach sermons, I would have missed out on a huge opportunity to understand what arguments I'm actually supposed to be debunking. Because the arguments that you think you need to address are actually not the arguments that are in people's living rooms. Second thing is, we're an elder-led church, so you need to get your elders up to speed theologically. I sent my elders a 53-page single-spaced document on all of my research. It was the first time our elders had received anything like it. You're going to ask, can I have it? The answer is no, because I didn't cite any of the work. It was just for me. Okay? But I can give you access to all the sermons we preached and the transcripts. Here's what I believed about my elders. I believed that our elders had a biblical worldview and were going to be strong on truth, but light on grace. And so I showed them the pinch points early and gave them time to discuss. So we had 2 elders meetings where we talked through the theological issues. Third thing I did is I got my staff up to speed theologically. I believed, so let me back up. Our church is in 3 states, and it is in 11 locations, and there are only 4 people on my staff who have a Bible college degree. So I have a lot of really good people on my team that love Jesus. But they only know probably what we've taught them, and we probably haven't taught them nearly enough. And this was my presupposition about my team, that my staff knew it was wrong, but didn't know why and could not articulate why. I believed my elders knew it was wrong simply because they'd probably heard tons of sermons on it in the 80s and 90s when Falwell made it a big deal about the religious right. So here is what I noticed in my staff. I believe that my staff were highlighting the wrong verses when it came to practice. They were talking about loving their neighbor. They were trying to protect relationships. And I had a fear that my staff's position was driven by self-preservation. I don't want to be labeled a bigot. I want to be a different person than what they're used to, than being a gospel-committed response. Okay? So, we did something really fun. We do a staff retreat every year. And this year's staff retreat, for 6 hours, I walked them through all 53 pages of that document. And you know what surprised the snot out of me is our staff loved it. It was, I honestly thought I was going to be slapping them to keep them awake. But it was refreshing for them to hear clear biblical teaching that gave them, that answered as all the questions that I know how to answer. Then we had questions and answers about practical issues. What does this look like in youth ministry? Youth ministry is the battleground. Early childhood is starting to experience it. Mm-hmm. The feedback was that they appreciated it all being done at one time. I asked them, would you have liked us to have done that over a 6-week period of time or over multiple things? And they said, no, it was super helpful because I didn't have to remember how we got to where we got because I was getting the information and it was just like a 12-course meal. Then, that's the next one, we got alignment practically. So once we solve everything theologically, we're going to get alignment practically. Because we're on the same page theologically, now we can figure out missionally, from an ecclesiology standpoint, from a practical manner, how are we as a church going to behave? And there's freedom in how you're going to behave here. But we're going to have alignment on how we're going to behave. And I'll get into that in a little bit. So I took our elders through it in June and July. I took our staff through it in August. I took our church through it in September. Here was the value. When I got on stage at our church, there was complete alignment, top to bottom, inside of our organization. There was no wiggle room. There was no space for people to exploit. Everybody knew what I was going to say. They knew where we were going to stand, and they had already processed what that looks like for them. And when people are going through a series like this, more people than you realize are thinking through this with a name. They're thinking through this with a relationship. And for our staff to already know this is how we handle stuff, gave them the tools to be able to navigate that in, I believe, a God-honoring manner. And then the last thing we did, which is something I never do, we circled back. Before and during the series, I circled back with our staff to rehash teaching or practical issues. We chose to embrace the messiness, to celebrate wins and conversations. It's going to take time for everybody in your church to process this. It's one thing in the room, it's another thing when you're across the table. And you've seen that happen over and over again. That it's one thing to say something from stage, it's one thing to say something in a staff meeting, it's another thing to hold that value when you're sitting across from a person that you care about. And so to give people an opportunity to kind of get up to speed and get comfortable. So, here are my 5 helpful tips on what you can do to make it the very best that you can make it at your location. I stole this from Kyle Eidelman, and this was absolutely brilliant. I told our people at the very beginning of the sermon series, this is the first one, no emails and no applause. He did the no applause one, I did the no emails one, but I gave our church both of them. This was the statement that I made at our church. We talk about grace and mercy every week, and there's not always applause. I am not going to allow you to clap for a sin that you don't struggle with, and a sin that Jesus died for. And so if you're not going to clap and cheer when I talk about heaven is real and hell is hot, and if you're not going to cheer and clap when I talk about how good God's grace is and how bountiful his mercies are, then when I say that homosexuality is a sin, you're not allowed to start clapping then. Just because you don't struggle doesn't mean we're going to celebrate it. Jesus died for it, and we should be celebrating that.
Can you reread those first 2 sentences you said? We don't talk about grace and mercy.
We talk about grace and mercy every week, and most times there's not an applause. We're not going to clap for a sin that you don't struggle with,
Okay, thank you.
even though it's a sin that Jesus died for. And we said from stage, we are accepting no emails. You can email us. Our reply is, when can we meet and talk?
Mm-hmm.
You stand zero. This is true in every area of church ministry. How many of you have won over email ever? You can't figure out tone. You don't figure out nuance. You don't know where they're coming from. What they're asking, they're probably not clearly communicating in the email. And when you get off the phone, get off email, criticism drops exponentially. So that's just how we operate as a church. If someone's ticked, when can we meet? You know what's interesting? How many people don't ever schedule the meeting?
Yep.
And the people who do, you win. I'll give you a Devo. I got up 2 weeks ago. We attract some of the most socially awkward people to our church. And they are addicted to the front 2 rows of our church. And they want to bring their kids with them. So it is not just that the people who get up 5 times during the service, like they just don't think I should sit in the back. And every year, I just pick a weekend where I'm going to tell all these people to stop. And I try to do it lovingly. I try to do it with a big smile on my face. And so I did my spiel. And then I said, and I want you to know that if you want to be the best parent you can be, your kids should be in kids' church. Because as good of a communicator as I might be, I can't do from 8 months old or 8 years old all the way to 88 years old. And so the best place for your kid to grow, if it's important for your kid to grow up and love Jesus, is not in here with me and you. It's back there in an age-appropriate environment where we have professionals who've been focused on making sure the gospel becomes real in their lives. And there might be some of you, after hearing all of this, that you're going, I'm still going to keep my kid in the auditorium. And I said, that's awesome. Great. Would you just please sit in the very back of the church? So the only kid or the only person that's being robbed of the opportunity to grow close to Jesus is you. There was a family in our church who, as they were walking in, their kids were talking out loud about, I'm so glad we get to come to our new church again today. And the brother said, It's not our new church. We've been coming here long enough. It's our church now. And those parents thought that I was talking about them. And before church was over, I had this email in my inbox. And they had me dead to rights. They're going, the kid that I love, the kid that I care about, you just said is nothing more than a distraction in your auditorium. And I said, look, you guys are normal human beings. I'm not talking to the normal people. I'm talking to the people who just don't know any better. When can we meet? One of our campus pastors met with them. I did a quick email back. We got them a swag bag, showed up for church on Sunday, gave them all gifts, told them we're super thankful for them, and the guy says, I want to get connected. You can turn criticism around when you can get across the table from somebody. And so when you tell people, what part of the LGBTQ abortion conversation do you want to have over email? Text? None of it. If someone were to sit across the table from you and press record over your conversation, you would get really nervous. That is functionally what you're doing when you decide to have the conversation over email. So our church loved it. I didn't get any hate mail because they knew that they would have to meet with us for it to make a difference. So that's just a little win for you. Number 2, timestamp your message. When you do it, say publicly, hey, it is the fall of 2023 because the terms that you're going to use, the laws that you're going to address, the fill in the blank, those all change. Those of you who are over 60, words don't mean what they used to mean when you used to say them. And things keep moving, and letters keep getting added. And because of that, you want people to at least have a timestamp to know, hey, just so you know, everything I was saying in 2023 was A-okay. Now, when you watch this on YouTube in 2033, I just want you to know it was a decade ago, okay? Communicate that the message was planned and not a response to recent events. So I was able to tell our church, we've been working on this series. We decided a long time ago that we were going to do it here because you don't know when culture is going to take a hard right or left-hand turn, and they're going to think that you are capitalizing. And on an issue that is so incredibly sensitive to people, looking like you're stepping on their throats is not necessarily the way you want to behave. So for you to say, hey, we picked this out, regardless of what happens over the next 5 weeks or what just happened in the previous 5 weeks, we're here because we wanted to be here and we didn't know where the rest of the world was going to be when we got here. Next one. My encouragement to you would be to teach more than preach. In my opinion, if you do the teaching right, the preaching will be easy and truly show off the goodness of the gospel. If you get super passionate and super excited on the front end, you don't have the platform and the truth to be able to teach or to preach a truly compelling gospel message. So take time to slowly walk people through things. Then once you've given them a solid educational basis, then you can preach through the implications of what we learned. Does that make sense? So like teach the scriptures and then preach the application. This one's going to be, whatever. Be clear as often as possible. On these issues, to be clear is to be kind. A sermon series that ends with everybody having their own opinion is not a good sermon series. A sermon series where you figured out how to talk about a super sensitive issue and it's really gray is not kind to your people. And it's definitely not kind to people in this community because what you basically did is you just propped up their sin, their struggle for you to look cool and give a bunch of people look how I navigate the gray. You need to be very specific about what is right and what is wrong. You need to be very specific about what is a sin and what is not a sin. You need to be very specific about the challenges that both sides bring to the table, not in a partisan way, but to at least help people acknowledge the real pain points that exist inside of here. You read these scriptures differently dependent upon how close you are to these issues. And for you to go through a series and not be clear means everybody go, why did we talk about it? Because I don't know where we are. Be very clear about how your church is going to operate. Be very clear that if you don't like the way our church operates, this is going to be, I just want you to know that this is what you're going to expect. And I'll get into that in just a little bit. You should take swings at both sides, but at the end, you should pick a side. You're going to take swings at religious people. You're going to take swings at sinful people. You're going to take swings through that series. You should take swings at that series. But in the end, you should have a very clear position. Let me give you this in the extreme. I'm getting ready to preach my sermon series on politics, and I'm carrying that same weight into my sermon series on politics. And I am probably going to say, I haven't done all my research yet, but I'm probably going to say, if you believe that life begins at conception, it would be really hard for you to vote for somebody else. Like, if you believe this, like, this is where I'm going to stand. I'm going to stand on life. That is not to say, and I'm going to say, hey, if you believe something, if you don't believe life begins at conception, you might want to vote you can vote someplace else. But I have to push myself to a position of clarity. Does that make sense? And I should try to take my people to a place of clarity. You should let your people know what they can expect to see at your church and how they should behave as a member of your church. Because your reputation is not going to be just what you preached from stage, but how your people behave at your church, in the pews, or in the chairs, or in the kids area, or in the community. I was in Titus this morning, and they claim to know God, but their deeds deny Him. And that's what a lot of our people in church are doing. They say that they have a knowledge of God and a love of God, but their deeds deny Him. Final, find the good news and the great ask for everyone. Everybody in your church should be able to experience the good news during that sermon series. They should be surprised by how they feel at the end of the message. And you should have a very clear big ask out of absolutely everybody. Because anytime you're exposed to the scriptures, there's something that has to be surrendered, as we've been hearing today. So whether you struggle or don't struggle, there's something that we should all have to surrender. This is what I do for every sermon I preach. I write down 3 questions. What do I want our people to know? What do I want them to feel? And what do I want them to do? Your ability to answer those 3 questions clearly will impact the way your message is received. What you want people to feel will determine your tone in the message. And really dialing those 3 in. And if you write a sermon that answers those 3 questions, and you did a good job of answering those 3 questions, you'll actually be very proud of the content that you put out. Try your best to know as much as you can about the people listening to your message and potentially answer those 3 questions for all the different people represented in the room. What do I want those who are LGBTQ, what do I want them to know? What do I want them to feel? What do I want them to do? The parents of a kid who is LGBTQ, what do I want them to know? What do I want them to feel? What do I want them to do? Christians in the room, when they encounter somebody, what do I want them to know? What do I want them to feel? What do I want them to do? Non-Christians who are in your church and hearing you talk about an issue that they don't struggle with, what do you want them to know? What do you want them to feel? What do you want them to do? Most of your work outside of the research will be answering those 3 questions. The final thing I would tell you is by God's grace, I shipped out 2 of the messages to Caleb Kaltenbach. And the reason I shipped out 2 of the messages is because it was remarkably affordable, and he is incredibly funny, and it is identity politics. He grew up in this space. He had a mother and a father who got divorced. The mom married a woman and the dad married a man. And so he has lived in the tension of that. And so when I was able to bring him in, I was able to clarify our church's position. He was able to walk people through some of the tension points. Then I did a full sermon on abortion, and then I did our Christian response. I also had him help unpack stuff to our staff from a practical manner. That is the big strokes for this. So real quick recap, 5 reasons why you should preach it. Your church needs to hear it. They should not be surprised by your positions or discover them later on. We're going to get labeled, at least let them label us accurately. People are struggling and need answers, guidance, and hope. And if we believe that God's way is the best way and we're not ashamed of the gospel, we should proclaim it as loudly as possible. 5 steps to the preparation of the series, like how did we do it? Systematically got myself up to speed, got my elders up to speed theologically, got my staff up to speed theologically, got alignment practically, and then we circled back frequently. And then 5 helpful tips to make it the best that you possibly can at your church. Make a no emails, no applause statement. Timestamp your message. Teach more than preach. Because if you do the teaching right, the preaching will be easy and truly show off the goodness of the gospel. Be clear as often as possible. And then find the good news and the big ask for everyone.
Thank you for tuning into this episode of the podcast. Please comment, like, and subscribe to this channel. Coming up next week, we have Dave and Sydney Clayton, who will talk to us about leading a church in prayer and fasting. See you next time.